All right, ready to tackle Adam Smith. We're going deep on Wealth of Nations today.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You sent over some excerpts and some more modern takes on it, too, I'll be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Always found this book a bit intimidating.
It's got a reputation, that's for sure.
It does. But that's why we're doing this, right? To break it down.
Exactly. Unpack it all.
So where should we even begin?
Yeah.
The intro stuff you sent over, it said Smith wasn't just an economics guy.
Yeah, no, he was much broader than that.
How does that show up in the book itself?
It's kind of woven through everything, like how he connects ethics, individual liberty, to how economies actually work.
Oh, interesting.
For example, he's big on justice, rule of law.
Makes sense.
Says those are essential for markets to function, right?
So it's not just like everyone do what you want, the market will sort it out.
Not at all. There's a moral side to it for Smith.
I'm seeing that. So does this tie into the whole invisible hand idea?
Absolutely.
Because that phrase gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not sure everyone really gets what he meant.
Yeah. It's become shorthand, yeah.
Totally.
For Smith, the invisible hand, it's a metaphor, right?
Okay.
It's about how when people pursue their own self-interest
Yeah.
under the right conditions, it can actually benefit everyone.
Benefit society as a whole.
Right. It's like an unintended consequence, not some big plan.
Okay, I kind of get that, but I need an example.
Sure.
Like, how does this actually play out?
Well, he uses this example of a pin factory.
Right. I've heard of this.
It's a bit of a cliche now, but it's a good illustration.
Yeah.
He shows how if you divide up the labor to make the pins, like one person draws the wire, another straightens it, another cuts it.
Specialization.
Exactly, specialization. And by doing that, each person gets really good at their task.
Efficient.
Super efficient. So the factory makes way more pins.
Than if one person was trying to do the whole thing themselves.
Right. And because there's more pins, prices go down, everyone benefits.
Okay, so specialization equals more efficiency, which ultimately helps everybody because
Things become more affordable, yeah.
more accessible. Interesting.
But think bigger.
Bigger than pins.
Way bigger.
This applies to whole economies, not just pin factories. When people, businesses, specialize, trade with each other.
It creates a better system.
More efficient, more prosperous overall.
So the invisible hand is kind of like guiding this whole thing.
Yeah, it's incentivizing people to do what benefits them, which then, without anyone planning it.
Creates this bigger wealth.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Of course, Smith was writing, over 200 years ago?
Yeah, the world was a very different place.
The economies were way simpler. Now we've got global supply chains, massive corporations.
Things he couldn't have even imagined.
But that basic principle, it still seems to hold up.
It does. It's remarkable.
That's what blows my mind about Wealth of Nations. It's so old, but it still feels relevant to how things work.
There are some fundamental truths in there about human behavior.
Absolutely. And it's not just the invisible hand thing, right? He also talked about supply and demand. Oh, yeah. Laid out some core principles there.
Which I'm assuming you're not going to give me an Econ 101 lesson here.
No.
Our listeners probably know the basics.
I would hope so.
But what did Smith add to this?
That's a good question. So he wasn't the first to talk about supply and demand, but he got really systematic.
Oh.
More sophisticated than what came before. He showed how those forces actually interact.
To determine prices, right.
Exactly. And how they allocate resources, drive economic activity.
So it's not just some theoretical thing for him. This is how the real world works.
For Smith, yeah, those are the engines of the market.
This is already giving me a much better understanding.
Yeah, okay.
But we're missing one big piece still.
What's that?
Government. Where does the government fit into all this?
Ah, yes. That is the D question, isn't it?
It is. And one that's still debated like crazy today.
Oh, absolutely. We'll get into all the nuance of Smith's view on that.
I will.
In the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. Okay, so where we left off was the role of government. Smith, he's kind of seen as the laissez-faire guy, right?
Right, let the market do its thing.
But I'm guessing it's not that simple.
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced. He did believe in limited government, for sure.
But not just hands-off completely.
No. For Smith, there were some key areas where the government had to be involved.
Like what?
Well, think about what we call public goods now.
Okay.
Things like infrastructure, education, national defense. Those were essential for him.
I could see that. It's tough to make a profit building roads. Right?
Exactly. That's the point. Private companies, they're not going to jump on that.
Same with education. Super important, but not always profitable.
Right. At least not on a large scale. So Smith recognized this.
The government had to step in those cases.
For the benefit of everybody. He also talked a lot about the rule of law,
Okay.
like enforcing contracts, property rights, making sure the legal system was fair.
Makes sense.
He saw that as crucial for markets to actually function.
So it's not about keeping government OUT, it's about setting the right conditions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Markets, they could be amazing for Smith.
For growth, for innovation.
But they needed the right foundation, and the government, it had to build that.
This ties back to what you said earlier about how Smith connects economics to, like, human nature.
Oh, definitely.
It's all connected for him.
Totally. Remember his discussion of the stages of economic development?
Yeah, from, like, hunter-gatherers to agriculture to, what do you call it, commercial societies?
Right. He was basically tracing how economic systems evolved.
Alongside human societies, yeah.
And he argued the role of government, it had to evolve too.
Meaning?
In simpler societies, you might not need much government at all.
But as things get more complex,
More specialization, more trade, more everything.
you need more rules, more structure.
More sophisticated governance to keep it all running smoothly.
So it's not just about, like, individual freedom versus the state.
No, it's
Finding the right balance.
for a particular society at a particular time. There's no one size fits all.
Which makes sense, but man, it makes it complicated.
Oh, it does. It's something that's still debated constantly. What works in one place?
Might not work in another.
Exactly. I think Smith would say, you got to be pragmatic about it.
Not just stick to some ideology.
He was more interested in how things actually worked, not just theory.
Makes you think about all the debates today. Globalization, free trade,
Oh, yeah.
the role of government in the economy.
Yeah.
We're still wrestling with these same questions.
Smith was exploring them centuries ago. It's remarkable.
The Wealth of Nations is, like, timeless in a way.
Because these are fundamental questions. Every society has to deal with them.
Of course, the world has changed a lot, since Smith's time.
Understatement.
Technology, global interconnectedness, the financial
He
system.
could never have foreseen any of that.
So it begs the question, how relevant are his ideas today?
Right. Are they actually useful for understanding our modern economy?
Or have we just moved past them?
That's the big question. And it's one we're going to tackle head on
We are.
in the final part of our deep dive.
So, Adam Smith, nuanced guy. But were his 18th century ideas actually useful today?
Big question, right? I mean, his world was pre-industrial revolution, pre-globalization.
Pretty much everything we know. He didn't have the internet.
Not even close.
So how does any of it apply to our digital world, these huge corporations?
Good point. And yet some of his core ideas,
Yeah.
surprisingly relevant. Take money, for example.
Okay.
He understood that money itself wasn't wealth.
It was just a tool.
A tool for exchange, right?
Like, a country hoarding gold isn't actually rich.
Unless they're using it, putting it to work.
I remember that part. But he went even further, right? Talked about how money's value,
It fluctuates.
like he was already dealing with inflation back then.
He was grappling with concepts that...
You still worry about today.
Exactly. Monetary policy, how to measure economic growth.
Wild. So some principles, they're just fundamental.
Seem to be, yeah. They hold up across centuries.
But what about the things that have changed drastically? Like, Smith was all about free trade.
He was a big proponent.
But now we've got these debates about globalization, jobs going overseas.
Fair trade.
It's a whole different ballgame.
And that's where context comes in. Smith's arguments, they made sense in his time.
Breaking down those old trade barriers.
Mercantilism, right.
Yeah. But it's not just trading stuff anymore. It's entire supply chains.
Intellectual property, whole industries moving around.
Exactly.
So Smith's ideas,
They're a starting point.
a good one. But we have to add in all these modern layers.
Environmental impact, labor standards, power imbalances between countries.
It gets complicated fast.
That's like having this old map.
Okay, I like this.
Still useful, gets you oriented.
The basic lay of the land.
But then you need local guides, people who know the specific terrain.
That's a great analogy. Smith gives us the big picture, but to apply it today.
We need that nuanced understanding.
Absolutely.
Another thing that jumped out at me, Smith's view on monopolies.
Oh, yeah, he wasn't a fan.
He really believed in competition.
To keep things fair, to drive innovation.
And it's so relevant now, right? All the debates about big tech.
Antitrust laws, lobbying.
It's like his warnings from centuries ago.
You're echoing in our own struggles.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But it shows those core dynamics.
Power, competition, they stay pretty consistent.
So we can't just take Smith's solutions and...
Evolve them into the 21st century?
Definitely not. But his work,
Gives us a framework.
concepts, Warnings even?
He makes us ask the right questions, even if the answers
Are different now. This has been quite the deep dive.
It has. We covered so much ground.
Self-interest, invisible hand, role of government, money, trade, monopolies.
Smith's legacy
Quite
is
complicated.
totally. He's a product of his time, but also
Offers these timeless insights.
exactly. So, as we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to really ponder about Smith today.
Ooh, good idea.
How about this? Smith loved self-interest, right? Driving force of the economy. But he also emphasized ethical behavior. So the question is, can we rely on self-interest alone
In our world, so interconnected,
to create a future that's just sustainable?
or do we need something more?
It's something to chew on, for sure.
Wow, it's a good one. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dives into the wealth of nations. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those minds curious.